I just want to say before we start, it was really cool what Trevor said, because it's going to be in line with exactly what I'm going to say today. But I was up here and I started laughing because I'm the guy standing beside the guy who was in the Georgia Dome in front of 80,000 people last night. And to me, I don't care about you guys, to me that's really, really cool. So thanks, Trevor. I just thought that was awesome. Before we go on, I'm going to read just a couple of verses that I want to meditate on you before we actually get into it. Then I'll explain what I'm going to do this morning. And I will talk a little bit about the military and some war stories. I have some friends here. And, I've been praying this week to the Holy Spirit that He'd give me the words and the courage to say them. So if I touch a couple subjects that they're uncomfortable with, it's okay if they get up and leave and come back later. I totally get that, so don't worry about it. But the first verse I'd like you to recognize is John 15, verse 9. And I'm using everything from the English Standard Version, although my favorite is the King James Version, but the English Standard Version helps people to understand a little bit better when they're first learning, if anybody's here like that. So John 15:9, as the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Abide in my love. And then John 15:12 and 13, this is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Greater love has no man or no one than that someone lay down his life for his friends. I've just read you these two verses to show you how very important love is in the Bible. And I know everybody who's spoken to people or tried to bring them along, we always say the same thing. Get into this and then start doing it. Yeah. And I don't know how many people I was like that. Read it. Until you read it, you're stuck. You have to open the book and read it and then get the love. And I'm going to read from the first page just to line it up right before I start talking about myself, in which case I don't need to look at notes. Our main function in this life now, once we're saved, is to flood the world with God's love and light by spreading and showing the good news that Jesus has given us for ourselves and all others. And that the greatest gift that God has given us is the salvation of ourselves through Jesus. Pastor Brian's asked me to share some of my military life with you in connection with key verses of the Bible. To be honest, there's just too many of them. So as I was thinking about it this week, I decided to go into one specific area, which happens to format with what Brian's been teaching the last 3 months. It also has a lot to do with what Linda and Trevor just said. I didn't know what they were going to say today, but holding on and letting go. I found it was hard to really get into it because I'm going to explain a very low point in my life, and it's a point about love that it's really truly heartbreaking. At the same time, it's a miraculous story and a miraculous miracle that's been happening to myself over the last 20, 30 years. I'm going to end up explaining to you how I ended up in a deep well. I call it Matt's man-made hell. But that well was full of despair, anger, hate, betrayal. You name it, I lived in the bottom of it. And it was an ugly, ugly, ugly place to live. But the one thing I can honestly tell you was at that point in my life, I had absolutely no love. None whatsoever. If a guy, and I love Chuck, but if I'm being honest, if Chuck had shown up here 15, 20 years ago, I was the type of guy who went, what? Get out. I'm not giving anything for anybody. I'm for me. I'm trying to fight my way through this, and that's it. Why do I care about somebody halfway around? Why do I care? I had no love. The stumbling block that causes you in your life it's undeniable. And as I go on to explain how I end up here, it's very important to share with others your life experience, especially for education and helping them get through their tough times as well as your own. And if you don't share, nobody can learn anything. The hard part is getting up here and sharing. And I would recommend everybody get up here and share. The other part I wanted to explain is just because my life was in the military and there were a lot of wow factors and and I've climbed mountains, jumped out of planes, I've done all kinds of things. Every person's a unique individual. And if you allow your problems, if you hold on to your problems, your grudges, your bitterness, all the stuff that the world throws at you as you're living through life, then you'll end up in a place I was, just as quick, just as easy, and there is no difference between my problem and your problem. Some people look and go, oh, well, that guy was in the army. Or Chuck goes all over the world to help people. I wish I could be like him. Or Trevor gets to go in front of all these bands. So it's different for those guys. That's a load of crap. Your problems are just as bad as anybody else's. And the way you deal with them is going to result to where you end up. And that point I wanted to really, really get to you, because then you don't look at me as I'm talking and go, well, I understand how he got there. Because the guy who's gotten his house robbed and he's had a few kicks in the rear and life's dealt him a few blows can end up in the same place I was at. Just as quick, just as easy. Sometimes it's suddenly, sometimes it takes time. But if you allow yourself to get there, now you got a fight on your hands. Now you're in trouble. So after saying all that, I'm going to go to the main part of the verses, and I'm going to start off with 1 Corinthians 13:1. And again, you're probably going to see the King James Version. I'm going to read to you the English Standard Version. If I speak in tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. If I give away all I have and deliver up my body to be burned, but have not love, I gain nothing. So now, faith, hope, I'm jumping ahead now to 13:13. So now faith, hope, and love abide, these three, but the greatest of these is love. I would strongly ask you this week just to go home and read 1 Corinthians chapter 13. But I'm going to ask you to read it from a different angle. The world has its own expression of love, and they explain it. The Bible explains love in a much different way. And I'm not going to explain you the different things, because as Pastor Brian has taught, you can't teach love. But when you don't have love, I can tell you what you do to get it back. And I can tell you what it was like to be in that spot. And we're not talking about the love between an individual. We're talking about God's love. And it's so important as Christians that we walk through life having God's love. Because if we don't have God's love, the Word says you're nothing. It don't matter. Might as well go... might as well go fart in the wind. Because it's nothing. That's what it means. And I've been there. When I first got here, I was here. My goodness, I was angry. I used to, for some reason I knew I should give, but I wasn't understanding how. So I used to take money and roll it up in balls and fling it in the corners of the church. Honestly, I told Brian, it's a true story. I throw it in the corner and I think, if somebody picks it up and puts it in his pocket, that's his fault. Because God, you're in charge, so I gave it to you. That's how bitter and angry I was. Except I came to a place that everybody kept saying hi to me. Everybody kept saying, how you doing? And trust me, I sat in the back, I sat up there, and I tried everything to make sure nobody would bug me while I was here. But I had promised God to come here and learn, and I wasn't breaking that promise. So once I got saved, and some of you lovely ladies of certain ages know I've come around and apologized to you for my behavior back then, because these sweet ladies would come up and say, hi Matt, how you doing? And I'd go blankety blank, 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 I don't know you, blankety blank, away from me. In the front hall, in the parking lot, round the corner, I didn't care. I don't know you, don't talk to me. I want nothing to do with you. Who are you, Christian people? I made a promise, I'm going to keep my promise. I even lied to myself when I got back, because when I made that promise, which I'll get to, it was when you guys were in the little church in Selwyn. Well, when I came back, you guys had moved. Nobody told me that, so in my little world, I don't have to worry about that when they close the church. And I went on like that for about a year and a half, not even thinking about it. Until somebody, can't remember who it was, said, oh yeah, that little church moved to Giant Tiger, or the old Giant Tiger, or the new Giant Tiger building, and then they moved to the church. And it was like God hitting me over, and you guys all know how stubborn I am, so it's like God hitting me with a 2x4, they're next door, yo-ho. And I say, okay, got to start going, but it's Super Bowl Sunday, got to start going. So I ended up, flooding in here. But how I got here is a unique story. First of all, when I was 17 years old, and you have to understand, I was from a Christian family. I didn't believe, but I was from one. They're still Christian today. They had faith. I just didn't believe it. I thought they were full of it. So when I turned 17, I joined the Army. That's what you do when you're young and smart. You quit school as soon as you can, and you join the Army, because I know everything better than most people. There's a warning for any young people listening, because years later I found out you don't know everything, and you're going to have to go back to school, which I did. But it's a lot harder doing it when you're in your 30s and crippled than when you're doing it when you're 17 and having a good time. But I quit school. I joined the only thing I wanted to do was join the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry. Boy, I'd read about them, and they were some bad actors. I was so happy. I went in there. The recruiter said, you got any trade you want except for these two. I said, I want to be infantry. He said, I said, you got any trade you want except for these two? I said, buddy, I want to be infantry. No, you don't. Yeah, I do. No, you don't. Yeah, I do. So I got to be infantry. If I had to listen to him a long time ago, a lot of stuff wouldn't have happened to me. So I joined the infantry. From there, they sent me to a place called Cornwallis, which is boot camp, and then to an Army training depot that's called Wainwright, Alberta. At that time, your first boot camp was about 3 to 4 months long, and your Army boot camp, or your training depot, was 6 months long. So I always remembered this, because after I was done my first boot camp, we got to Wainwright. And we were so full of ourselves. I'm telling you, there was a bunch of 17, 18, 19-year-olds. We were all hardcore men now. We did our 3 months in boot camp, and we made it. It's the easy street now. We rolled through the gate, see these weird-looking huts. Kind of looked like garbage cans to us. And we all decided on the bus, that must be where they keep all the ammunition or garbage. It was where we were. That's where we were living. We got out, straight into one of those old rusted up cans, and discovered quite quickly that the old rusted up derelict building in 6 months from now was going to look brand spanking new. Because we were the ones with the steel wool going around the outside and shining all the metal and everything inside. And with all the rest of our training. But during that time, and here's I'm a military guy, and I did love my job. I was very good at it, probably too good. But when you're 17, 18, and 19 and you join the Army, they have a military ethos, and you're not grown up. So it's a lot easier for you to mold young minds than it is to mold guys coming in at 39 or 40 if there's trouble in the country. And the Army basically taught you, look, you're a man now, you're an Army man, you're hardcore, you're trained, you don't feel pain, you don't cry about stuff, you'll go in freezing cold weather, wet, didn't matter, but you don't whine about it. You do your job. And again, over time, you get that mentality stuck in your brain, and you see from 17 to 24, my brain's still growing. I didn't know that back then. I thought I'm a man now and I'm all grown up. But my brain wasn't all grown up, I was a kid. But in my kid's mind, now I'm a soldier. And I did all the kinds of, we used to go on 20-mile runs and we'd be trucking down the road. Blood makes the grass grow, blood makes the grass grow. Do that for 6 months and see how your thinking is when you run across some guy asking for money on the street. It changes your view a bit. So over time, it got harder and harder in my emotions and mentality because that's what they teach you. If you were sick, my goodness, don't go to the MIR, medical inspection room, for any of you guys who don't know what I'm talking about. Don't go to the MIR. Because the first thing that the soldiers or your friends will say is, you're a wimp. You're a loser. So you don't go to the MIR until you're so sick, you're pretty sure you're going to die. And when you do that, then the Army really craps on you because you waited too long to go in to get help. But at least the guys aren't going to bug you. If you, now I've never passed out on a parade, but I know the proper military way of doing it. You stand at attention, and when you thunder in, you thunder in. That means you keep your hands at your side, and there's the pavement, and your nose better hit that before any other part of your body. Then the military will forgive everything. You're good to go. You got 18 stitches, but you passed out the right way. What they didn't like is the guy who feels dizzy and does this. Oh, that's bad. Don't bend down on one knee. Because we didn't hear a thump. I didn't hear your rifle hit the ground. You wussed out. And as you're doing your training, they send you on more and more courses. And that's the first time I really did think about God, because they send you on a jump course. And I know one of my friends here is a jump master, and he'll attest to the fact. Trust me, the first time you jump out of a plane and you follow this set drill, the jump master's at the door, and he'll say, get ready. So, y'all, stand up, hook up, check equipment. Equipment check, number 1, 2, 3, 4, ready to go. Then it's go. So then it's 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Next thing you know, you're falling through the sky. You don't have time to think about what you're doing, trust me. It's drilled into you so much that you don't have a second to think until... Now, I don't know about the other guys, but the first thing I thought was, God, open my chute. And between the door and your chute opening is about 1.5 or 2 seconds. But I'm telling you, it felt like 50 minutes. God, open my chute. And then the canopy opens, you hear the rush, it jerks you up, kind of makes you a little bit disabled before you hit the ground. For you ladies that don't understand, your harness is here and you're like, oh, and now you got to do your landing. So all the courses, and every course you're on, it's to make you the best soldier you can be, to give you the toughest thing you could be. Bang, 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 the career rolls on, and I get leadership courses and promoted. But another thing I can tell you is the Army became my God. I do not have to think about that at all. Everything I did, ate, breathed, the partying I got up to was all for the Army. My decisions, how is this going to affect my career? What should I do? No thought of God in there. I'd go home now and then. My dad would say, come to church. I'd tell him where to go. My mom would try to keep the peace. He'd go to church, I'd go drinking. Just the way it was. He never gave up on me. And if you'd ask him today that he thought I'd ever be standing here, I bet you'd get a pretty funny answer. But that's the way it went. And over the training, I did all kinds of things. I did 6 years in Germany, about 8 or 9 different tours. But I'm going to speed up a bit so I can get to the part I want to describe. I ended up in 1993 in a place called Yugoslavia. First of all, we were in Sector West, and then we got moved to Sector South. Sector South was bad news. So while we were in Sector West, we get an emergency road move order, and we were told to take all the armored personnel carriers and vehicles that we all had and drive down to Sector South. And the order was, you don't stop for anything. No matter what's happening, you do not stop. So on the way down there, my cook drove over a Croatian police car. He didn't kill anybody, but he wounded a couple. Like they were pretty serious injuries because they sat in the car thinking he'd stop. Now his orders were, you don't stop. So when the car pulled in front of the police were pretty smart. They went in front of a big army truck instead of the tanks. But the order was the same, so my cook ran over the cop car. And the next spot we were getting gas, and it's called a POL point. Oh, he was crying, and he came running up to me. Oh, warrant officer, this is so bad. I ran over the cop car. And I went, so? Yeah, aren't I going to get in trouble? Yeah, you would if you had to stop, but you kept going, so good for you. The guy actually got accommodation, and we kept racing down south. I just told you that little story to let you know how serious it was, because a lot of people were dying in Sector South, and our job was to go down there and stop it. Now, we got to the very start of the Sector South exercise, and my sergeant major got pulled out of the field for some reasons that were, personal, and he had to go back to Canada for 4 weeks. So I was a new warrant officer in the regiment. Didn't think I knew we were going to get a replacement sergeant major. What I didn't know was that the colonel and the brigade commander had decided I'm going to get a battlefield promotion to sergeant major. I had no idea it was coming. Boom, there you are. You're a sergeant major. You now have, instead of 36 guys, you got 154. And then you get your attachments, the tanks and the mortars, and it grew up to 350. And we were about to go into a combat zone that was actually fighting. And it was a little disheartening for me. I was a little worried about losing people, which we did. But you got to understand, when I got that position, I leapfrogged about 60 other warrant officers to get that position that the officers decided I deserved, but that doesn't mean the other 50 warrant officers liked it. The Army's big on tradition, and it's big on whoever's got the time in, they're getting the job. And of course I didn't have the time in, but I got the job. The next day we lost Johnny Bayshart. He was a young fella that I sent on leave because he had just had a 2-week-old kid, and he took an RPG round in his waist. And it went off, and when I got to him, he was cut in half. And I held him in my lap, and there was nothing we could do. There was nothing the medic could do. We all knew that. And his eyes were glazing over. And, I'd seen death before, but that was the first time it stared me right back. And he said, Sergeant Major, tell my wife I love her. Tell my kid I love her. His kid's 3 weeks old. I felt pretty bad about that because I was the guy who sent him home early so he could be there for the birth of his daughter. If I hadn't have sent him home, he wouldn't have been where he was when he got hit. Something you have to live with. But I dismissed that because, like I said, the Army's my God, and we're all tough men now, and it's not going to bother me. From there we went to the Massalina Bridge, which is the key road that joins the Medak Pocket with the rest of the Croatian side. And our job was to sit on top of a smaller mountain, observe the bridge, and radio back when people were coming across. So we got in there, started building the bunker, and lo and behold, we started taking 105 shells. It got so bad that we were taking 60 shells a minute for 10 days. We didn't, at the start, have any cover, so I had to send the company out of the area before we could come in at night and build some shelter, so at least we'd be a little bit protected. But when you do that, you still have to, you got all your gear on the ground, So me and 3 guys had to stay there during the day while the rest of the company was back there while the shells are coming in. Well, that's when the Serbs attacked us because they wanted to steal our gear. So we fought off. We called them scavengers. We fought those guys off for a couple days, and the company came back in, and we built our bunkers, and everything was good. And then that's when the Croatians decided to get really serious. And we knew that because that day we had gone up on the OP, looked through the telescopes, and all these tanks started coming across the bridge. Now, there aren't supposed to be tanks in that area, but there they are. They were Leopard A2s, main battle tanks. I was on the horn with the brigade and the company commander, telling them there's tanks crossing the bridge. Now, the Army is a funny, funny world. Because immediately I got a captain on the radio who was the intelligence officer, and he said, look, there's no tanks here. Now, he was from Canada and hadn't done 6 years in Europe with the mechanized division. I had. I said, sir, trust me, there's tanks there. They're going across the bridge. I'll count them as they go across. He said, no, they're not. We have good intelligence that there's no way. The Croatians have guaranteed us there's no tanks. Well, then I got a little excited on the radio and didn't follow voice procedure very good and gave a few, colorful Army phrases to let this guy know they're real. There's tanks there. Didn't believe us. At that time, the Croatians were monitoring our radio, and they knew I knew the tanks were there. So they decided, man, we better get these dudes out of here, and they hammered us. And they hammered us so bad we had to pull back to the top of a mountain. And I got you here so you could understand how I ended up in Selwyn. We had the company at the bottom of the mountain, a platoon on the very top of the mountain. The mountain had a flat spot that was probably the size of the church parking lot. So we could put all the tents and gear there with the satellite equipment and the binoculars, because we could still, with powerful lenses, still see the bridge. About 400 feet below the mountaintop, there was another area that was probably the size of the parking lot. Take Canadian Tire and Walmart together. It was about a 30-minute walk around this trail just below the summit. So we had heard some noises, and I decided I'm going to take a foot patrol, me and 2 other guys, and we're going to walk around the mountain really quick to make sure nobody's sneaking up on anybody. And at the time, I left my radio behind because I knew it was only 20 minutes. It's not a big deal. I'll leave the old radios are heavy. They weigh about 20 pounds, and you get tired of lugging them around. It's a pretty secure position, so I made the call. We're going to leave the radio. And we started our little foot patrol. And of course, about halfway around, when we're on the forward face and nobody can see us, we got direct fire from a sniper position. And that dude hammered us so bad that I still remember sitting in the rocks, and you'd go to take a look to try and get a shot, and he would hit the rocks, and all the shrapnel from the bullets in the rocks would be embedded in your face. I turned around to see if the private was okay, and he was in a fetal position throwing up, because he realized as we were running to get in this little crevice that all the rounds were hitting between his legs. And you can't blame a young fellow when you see bullets whipping between your legs. He might break down for a minute before he gets it back. The problem was I couldn't call for help. So here's this tough Army guy whose God's the Army, and he's got no options. Guess who I called for? I said, okay, God, if you're up there, if you get me out of this crappy spot, I will go to that little church in Selwyn every Sunday night. For as long as I'm around. And most Sunday nights I make it. Now and then I miss a couple. And we were stuck there for about 3 hours until the company sent a fighting patrol around to figure out what was going on, because nobody could talk to you. And of course, once they came around the corner, they removed the sniper's nest. It resulted in 3 Serbians being killed. But at least my guys and me weren't killed. And during that 3 hours, I knew they were trying to sneak up and throw grenades up. But you cannot stick your head above cover when a sniper has you pinned down. One of my courses is a sniper course. I got the master's sniper course too. And trust me, if I have you in my sights, you don't stick up your head. If you do, you're dead. That's just the way it is. And the story, it's really simple. So they got me out of there, and that's where I made the promise to come to Selwyn, which I kept, and that's when you guys ended up meeting me. Sunday nights. Now, after that whole fiasco had happened, the Croatians decided they were going to invade and attack a couple of towns. One of them was called the Medak, and the military called it the Medak Pocket. Now, in the Medak Pocket, they attacked with their regular army, 6,000 strong, part of their 2 brigades. When they had just about, when we stopped them where we stopped them, the colonel called me up, and I had to take 2 tracks or tanks up to what we call a crossing point right in front of them and hold it until the battle group would come in the next morning. And we knew there would be fighting. So again, on that night, there was me and 4 guys. And when I say I was in front of 6,000 people, right in the middle of the road. And when we walked around, we saw all the laser lights from the Croatians' snipers. They're all over us. And we knew it was to harass us. We didn't know if they'd shoot or not. But I can tell you, it gives you a different kind of feeling when that's going on. When about 1 o'clock in the morning, a firefight erupted off to our left. And it was Charlie Company was being attacked by the Croatians. And the colonel phoned up and said, "Can you open up with your 50 and try and give them flanking fire?" Well, that didn't sound like a good idea to me, because at the crossing point, we were 4 miles in front of any other UN position. There was a valley, and we were it. And in front of me, there was 4 of those non-existent tanks, and their barrels are pointing, and they were 50 feet away. Not to mention the lasers. So I explained it to the colonel, who, thank God, he decided, okay, we better not use you. And he opened up with another company on the far flank. And that morning they came in, and we ended up fighting the Croatian army and pushing them back 35 miles. Now, in the history books, if you look up the Medak battle, the Croatian government will tell you it never happened. If you ask the Canadians that were there, that got the citation from the Governor General, we removed 346 dead soldiers. And we lost a few guys, but more to the injuries, because when they pulled out, they had left a bunch of booby traps. I happened to be unlucky enough to stand on one, but lucky enough that one of my soldiers could put a grenade pin through the safety sear so it couldn't go off. If I had done this, I wouldn't be here today. So there's lots going on out there, and I'm going to get a little graphic, because you have to understand about how you lost, or I lost, the love. While I was at that crossing point with my guys, we all experienced it. The Croatians lined up some of the civilian population that they had captured, and they had a big bonfire going. The kids are gone, so I'm going to tell you the way it is. I don't talk about it much. They heated up metal so it was white and red hot. And then about 20 feet in front of us, they started with the old men first. And we sat there listening to the screams of UN, help us. And I was on the radio begging the colonel, who I was told later was on the radio begging the general in Zagreb to let us open up. Our opening fire policy rules were very explicit. Unless we were fired upon in a direct fire, which means the bullets have to be really, really, really close. As a matter of fact, the one time I showed the bullet holes in my shirt to justify my platoon opening up. Because the Army gets mad when you open up at the wrong time. So we were begging for permission, and we were told, are they shooting you? Well, they weren't. Now, the Croatians knew the rules just as good as I did. So they did this, they took the old guys, worked their way down to the young guys. Then they took the 14 and 13 and 12-year-olds, the boys first, did things to them that I won't talk about. Then they tied up the older women, just shot them. And then it's a special heart for me, the young ladies of the church and the kids, because they did things to the women in front of us. And it wasn't polite, and they made sure they were dead afterwards in what I would call the most gruesome way you could ever watch somebody die. And then they took the babies, and that made my mind go nuts. My guys went a little stir crazy, and they took the babies and did stuff and threw them in the burning buildings. And we weren't allowed to do anything till 6 o'clock in the morning. At 6 a.m., we were given the green light to remove the Croatians, which is why I can honestly tell you that we pushed them back 36 miles and there was quite a few dead on their side. But I always remember when that time came, and I'm not proud of this, I turned savage. My guys turned savage. Most of the company turned savage. We had watched what had happened. And we were so angry. We were so pissed at those people. How dare you harm a child? How dare you hurt a woman? How dare you just take an old man? And there was one guy, and oh God forgive me, I didn't even use my gun. I took my double-edged Gerber out and I gutted him like a fish. And I was glad I did it. I was happy. That's how disturbing this place was. This is what my mind was like. You'd think you'd be sad for taking a human life. No, I knew he deserved it. I knew he deserved it down to his core. He was evil. Having said that, God still loved that man. I didn't know back then, but God still loved him. God loved me. God loved everything that happened, not what happened, but God loved everyone involved in that. He loved them. It's not a love that's emotional. It's not a love, well, it is emotional, don't get me wrong, but it's not a lust love. It's not a physical thing. It's just pure love. And people, if you're married, if you're going through life, this is what I learned. That kind of love is sacrifice. That kind of love is action. That kind of love is doing something you don't want to do because it's good for someone else. Not you. That's the kind of love God has. So I just wanted to explain that before I continue on. That battle lasted 2 weeks, and we were pretty broken up after that. And of course, we got all kinds of medals and commendations for the job we did. We got back to Canada. There were big parades and highlights, but the only thing I could think of doing was drinking and doing my job. So I did that for a little while, but I became pretty sick fast. My body was breaking down, plus I had mental problems with combat stress and post-traumatic stress disorder. I asked some veterans once what the difference was with PTSD, because it seems to me after World War II, we didn't have this problem that we had. Apparently we did, they just drank a lot and didn't talk about it. But he said it wasn't as bad because you guys had to deal with innocent lives being totally ripped apart all the time, where we dealt with another army. And it's different. And when I talk about genocide, I've been in the fields where everything's dead. The sheep, the cows, the dog, the cat. I mean, you name it, it's dead. It's in the field in front of you with all the people, hopefully not tortured. And at the time, we had to move all the bodies. And then we had to fill the other carcasses with diesel and burn them. There are no body bags for that many people, so we would just put them on the truck, 2 weeks later, we got in trouble for what they called inhumane way of dealing with the human Marines. Well, what do you do when you have nothing? You're trying to get them to a spot where you can humanely take care of them. But I was also on a patrol where we took 20 bodies off the top of a mountain. We ended up in a big firefight halfway down, hanging on harnesses. Plus you have 200 or 300 pounds tied to you. If you're the guy they're shooting, you cut the rope. The body falls down. And you get in trouble because you let the body drop down. The guys could handle that because, hey, at least I'm alive. So we're back in Canada, and I had all kinds of issues. At the time, I didn't realize my guys had been exposed to a whole bunch of toxins, which we found out later. I also didn't realize, see, when I say I was good at my job, I really mean it. My company commander was good at his job, and he was... So what happens in the military is when you're really good at what you do, the colonel picks you all the time. So if he knows it's going to be hot, there's going to be fighting, Delta Company's going, and to some extent Charlie Company, because they'd done some fighting, but it seemed to the men that we were always picked and we were always in this life-threatening situation. So during that time, we had a lot of reserve guys in our platoon that had been trained, but they weren't professional soldiers with us. I found out later they poisoned me. They poisoned me because they thought I was volunteering for all these missions. They had no idea you don't volunteer for missions, you get picked. So when I'm back in Canada and I'm really sick, then I get told by the government, and it's on the papers, you're poisoned. Then I get told you're kicked out of the army. Then I was told, by the way, you don't get a pension. You got enough time for your normal army pension, which was about, at the time, $1,000 a month. But the doctors are telling me I'm dying. And on this side, I'm told I'm never going to work again. And then the people who I gave my life to, you got to understand that. I was so big on the military. They went like that. And I felt betrayed so bad. I was so alone. I ended up in an apartment. I had a pillow and an air mattress and a blanket. I got my $1,000 a month. $850 went to rent, but it included heat and hydro. So at least I wasn't cold, and I wasn't, I had hydro. And gradually I started eating. And that's the position I started coming to Selwyn in. And I was broken. But you see, I totally back then thought it was God's fault. I was like much of the world. Why did you let that happen? Why did you do that, God? You let those babies die. You let this happen. You let that happen. Until I started reading this. And I read this, and I hate, I'm going to ruffle some feathers here, but to me this is a simple book. It's not simple to be Christian. It's kind of hard. But this is a simple book. It was written simple, so like me can understand it. But we don't get it until we open it and really start reading it. And I don't mean read it from cover to cover, because I tried that at the start. And your pastor, Pastor Brian, I was in his car back then, and he was trying to lead me to Christ. And I would look, I'm getting excited. I would physically look up and say, Pastor Brian, I can't accept Jesus, because I have these people to kill in Ottawa. And I'm going to do it because this is unjust. And the problem is, I could do it. I had the training. I had the knowledge. I'd already killed. I knew it wouldn't bother me. But they were playing with my family. They were playing with my guys. They were all not getting pensions. I had people committing suicide, and I got mad. Back to that familiar, I'm angry. Brian tried to walk me through it. But your pastor was smart enough to say, okay, keep coming. He didn't say, you're a butt plug, you're going to kill somebody. I'm going to call, he said, keep coming. Because at the time, and I know I'm getting close, so if you want me back to tell the rest of this story, ask Pastor Brian. But I'll finish it up as nice as I can. Brian, he took it. I was seeing at that time 4 different specialists, including a psychologist and a psychiatrist. I was taking, if you ask him, it was probably close to 56 different medications a day just to keep me sane. It wasn't because too much of my illness. It was to keep me from hurting somebody. And then the Army said, why don't you smoke dope? I'm telling you, I was going to court now. I was fighting for things. I was getting these guys going, and things were just so complicated. I'd come to the front, different pastors were here, and they'd pray over me, and they'd say this, your brain's a mess. It's got so many thoughts. I don't get it. But I got it, because I knew what they were talking about. He might not have, but he got it right. That's important. That's important when you're the guy standing there with that much going on. So we were fighting in the court, and it was actually the top lawyer that worked for the government on the defense side, because I was suing them. He's the one who said, Judge, we should let him smoke dope. This is about 15, 20 years ago. As much as he wants. It'll help him. He's going to eat. He's going to be happy. But I was such a corrupted person, I thought, you dink, you're trying to make me do it so you can get away with this. Yeah. And then I'm going to go to court and you're going to go, he's smoking dope. Doesn't know what he's talking about. Now, I don't know if that was the Holy Ghost back then, but it made me even angrier. But my point is, I had lost, because of everything that's going on, I had lost all my emotions, everything. The only thing I knew was anger, rage, depression, hatred, you name it, I had it, but all in the wrong sequence and all the wrong stuff. And then I met Kim. Very strong woman, my Kim. I love Kim. We went to my doctor, and we had decided I'm going to get married. Again, this is before I'm saved. And I didn't know this at the time because I was in seeing the other doctor, and they pulled her into a little office in the back, psychiatrist, psychologist, and they tell her, are you nuts? You want to marry this guy? And she said, yeah. He said, right now, he's just living this. It's a lie. The man will never have emotions again. Because if he brings them back, he will be insane. He's dead to himself and the world. He's just going through life. An empty shell. So when I read this verse, and I'm trying to hurry up here, but really it's important that somebody hears this today. When I read this verse, and if I have all the faith as to remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. Please trust me when I say I know what it's like to be there. And it sucks. It sucks so bad. And I don't know if anybody out there is feeling like I do, because I can go back, because what I just told you was a horrendous story on how you lose it all. But if you let life get you down as you go through it, if you let little things become bitter, if you love somebody and start thinking about yourself. I mean, on the Tompec, if you want a good house, do this. Put Jesus first. Yeah. Then your spouse. Then you. Then the kids. No matter which partner you are. And if you make all your decisions based on that, I guarantee you 80% less problems. Guarantee you. I hate doing the dishes. I do them because I know Kim likes it. It's so the simple little things. You do, you sacrifice, you bend over. You let the other have what you need, and if she does the same, boy, it's a wonderful house to live in. Amen. But now that I told you that, it took us, and Linda will tell you, so Pastor Brian, a lot of counseling, a lot of work, but we got there. We got there. And the only thing that can save you after all this, now listen to me, the only thing is Jesus, the love of God. I can't tell you how many people I know are addicted, are on drugs, are totally screwed up because of their service. But I also understand it's not just the military, it goes right across the world. And when somebody's addicted, it's because they're reaching for something that they really, they want to get rid of the pain, they want the love, they want this, they want that. And we don't realize it's right in front of us. And it's free. God gave it to us. God gave it to us. And with that, I'm going to sum up really quick. And I've said that like 3 times. But like I say, if you want me back, ask Brian and we'll see what happens. But in my conclusion, just the other week, I told you about a good friend of mine, Steve. And he died. But before he died, he got saved. Now, it was only 2 days before he died, but he got saved. And that's when I realized, that's when I realized that God, in His goodness and His love, no matter who you are or what you've done, is always sending people to you. I think your whole life, He's sending people, knock, knock, knock. You in? Not yet. Okay, I'll come back later. Right down to the last couple days to make sure you don't go to hell. And the lady that was really being an obstacle that I referred to as, I thought she had some evil in her, but I also told you that God told me to pray for her, which we have been. Called another friend, couple of mine the other day, and said, Matt and Kim must be mad. They must be so mad at us. And you know what that couple got to say? No, they're not. They're praying for you. Because that's what God told us to do. And I'm just giving you the love part because we all need it. And if we just bite into God's love and you start doing it, you can start today, and it's simple. You do what you need to do for other people. You love your neighbor as you love yourself. And when you love your neighbor as yourself, all of a sudden you care what Chuck. Hey, Chuck, I care about what you're doing. I gave you money for the churches. I care now. I have empathy. I can go up. Before I'd kick a bum on the street rather than talk to him. Now I'm trying to help him. Might not be by giving money. It might be advice. But way back when I had no love, Kim would tell you how many people ran out of that coffee shop crying because I dared to talk to them for about 10 minutes and fill them in. It's so important. So the trials through life can be complicated. They're hard, and we must guard our hearts and our souls from them. The things that try to steal or destroy our love and the love of Jesus that abides in every one of us can happen suddenly or over time slowly, degrading and ebbing away our love for each other and Jesus. Letting bitterness, anger, hurt, unforgiveness, pride, religion, hate, fear, all can help that love slip away. And our only defenses, or it'll take it away if we allow it, but our only defense is staying in the Word, sharing with each other, worshiping and praising, praying, dwelling on all things good, and how we can defend ourselves as well as grow up in God's love. And as we get it later in the prayer part, if I pray for you today, I'm going to ask for God's love to infest your life and bless you. But all you have to do to get it is start loving by action, by word. Not, I love you. It's, gee, I love you. Do you need help today? Giving somebody, it's so simple. And the love of Jesus is the simplest part of all. So in a minute, Linda's going to come up and tell you what's going on. But I also want anybody here that has never taken the love of God or the love of Jesus, it's called being saved. And I'm not talking about religion. I'm not talking about rules. I'm talking about the Son of God and His love for you. Because if you don't have it, or if you think you don't have it, you're going to hell. And I haven't been to hell, but I've been somewhere pretty close. And I never want to even take an inch back. Because I'm with God now, and Jesus is my Lord, and that's what I live for. Amen. But if you have doubts, you come down to Coach's Corner and you tell them. Don't come into the line for me, because I'm just going to pray God's love and blessing on you, let you go home happy and peaceful. I didn't touch half the story. I'm telling you, I tried to keep it short. And God loves you.